The security camera footage from Murphy's gas station would later be studied by FBI analysts for weeks. How does a 58-year-old overnight worker move like that? How does he know exactly where to position himself? How does he end a dangerous situation? In 47 seconds without breaking a sweat? Frank Morrison never gave interviews. He never explained. He just clocked out at 6 a.m. like nothing had happened. But if you want to understand what happened that night, you need to go back. Way back. To a time when Frank Morrison was somebody completely different. Character introduction? This story doesn't. Start that night. This story goes back 6 years, to when Frank Morrison first started working at Murphy's gas station. A quiet man working the darkest hours of the night on Route 19 in rural Kentucky. The kind of place where everybody knows. Everybody, except nobody really knew Frank. Customers looked at him, but they didn't see him. Drunk college kids from Eastern Kentucky University would stumble in at 2 a.m., talking to him like he was furniture. Impatient truckers would snap their fingers at him, demanding coffee refills. Local teenagers would mock his slow movements, his quiet demeanor, his worn-out work boots. "Hey, old man, you got any energy drinks back there?" They'd say, not even making eye contact. Frank would just nod, point to the cooler, and ring up their purchases. No conversation, no complaints. Just invisible service. Nobody knew about the Purple Heart collecting dust in his single-wide trailer on Elm Street. Nobody knew about the 847 confirmed kills in Mosul. Nobody knew about the nightmares that still woke him up at 3 a.m. And tonight, nobody would believe what this quiet gas station attendant was about to do. Daily routine, detailed Frank Morrison. Followed the same routine every night. Clock in at exactly 10 p.m. Check the register, count the till. Turn on the pumps, test the card readers, unlock the front door. At 10:15, he'd walk the perimeter of the building, checking for anything unusual. Old habits die hard. At 11 p.m., restock the cigarette display, clean the coffee machine, wipe down the counters. He'd arrange the beef jerky display exactly the same way every night. Tallest packages in the back, shortest in the front. Perfect military precision that nobody noticed. After midnight, the world gets quieter. Route 19 becomes a ghost road. Occasionally, a trucker hauling freight to Louisville. Sometimes a factory worker from the Caterpillar plant heading home after a double shift. Most of the time, just silence and the hum of fluorescent lights. Frank preferred it this way. Silence was safe. Silence was predictable. Silence didn't ask questions about the scars on his hands or why he never took vacation days. Tonight started differently. At 10:30 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to pump number 3. The engine was still running. The windows were tinted so dark, you couldn't see who was inside. The license plate was obscured by mud. On purpose, Frank noticed. Most people would have called the cops. But Frank Morrison had seen worse things in Fallujah. He'd learned to read. Danger the way other people read newspapers. And this situation? This was about to get very dangerous. Past flashback, extended, Iraq. Under the desert sun, Frank Morrison was just 22 years old. A farmer's son from a small town outside Austin, Texas. His daddy raised cattle. His mama taught Sunday school. When he joined the army, he just wanted to serve his country and maybe get some money for college. He didn't know how war would change him. Basic training at Fort Benning was nothing compared to what waited in Iraq. The heat that could kill you. The constant threat of IEDs. The way your best friend could be laughing with you at breakfast and gone by lunch. In Mosul, Frank's talent was immediately noticed. A natural ability, calculating distances, reading wind speed, controlling his heartbeat. While other soldiers struggled with the chaos of urban warfare, Frank found a strange peace behind the scope of his rifle. "Morrison, you see that building at 2 o'clock?" Sergeant Rodriguez would whisper. "Third floor, second window from the left?" Frank would adjust his scope, calculate wind drift, account for the morning heat rising from the concrete. "Roger that, Sergeant. Target at 847 meters. Wind from the east at 12 miles per hour." Frank held his breath, felt his finger on the trigger. In that moment, everything else disappeared. The war, the fear, the homesickness. Just him, the rifle, and the mathematics of precision. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Bang. Target down. Just 3 months later, he had become one of the best snipers in the 2nd Infantry Division. His confirmed kill count started climbing. 100, 200, 500, each number representing a life ended, a threat eliminated, a friend saved. The other soldiers started calling him Ghost. He could disappear into any environment, set up in impossible positions, make shots that seemed supernatural. Command started giving him the hardest assignments, the impossible shots. The Save the Squad missions. Frank discovered he was good at war. Too good. The incident that changed everything. But there was one day in Mosul that changed everything. October 15th, 2004. Frank was positioned on a rooftop, providing overwatch for a patrol moving through the market district. Intelligence said there were 3 insurgents planning an attack. Frank spotted them. 3 men moving through the crowd. One had a backpack, probably an IED. Another was talking into a radio. The third was watching the American patrol approach. "Command, I have eyes on 3 tangos. Permission to engage?" "Negative, Ghost. Too many civilians. Wait for a clear shot." Frank watched through his scope. The patrol was getting closer. The insurgents were getting into position. He could see the trigger man's finger hovering over the detonator. "Command, I need permission to engage." "They're about to trigger." "Negative, Ghost. Stand down." Frank watched the scene unfold. The patrol was 50 meters away. 40 meters, 30 meters. The insurgent's finger moved toward the trigger. Frank disobeyed. Orders. He took the shot. Bang. The insurgent fell. The IED didn't detonate. The patrol lived, but in the split second before Frank pulled the trigger, a child had run into his line of fire. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, chasing a ball that had rolled into the street. Frank's bullet went through the insurgent's chest and through the little girl's shoulder. She lived. But Frank Morrison died that day in a different way. Trauma and return extended. 847 confirmed kills. Each one somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's brother. But it was the one little girl who survived that haunted Frank Morrison every night. When he returned to America in 2005, nobody recognized him. His family remembered him as Strong Frank, the boy who could rope a calf and fix a tractor. Now they saw a quiet, withdrawn man who jumped at sudden noises and couldn't sleep in closed rooms. He tried to readjust. Worked at his uncle's auto shop for 6 months, but the sound of air tools reminded him of gunfire. Tried construction work, but being on rooftops triggered flashbacks. Tried factory work, but the routine and noise drove him crazy. His girlfriend from high school, Sarah, tried to help. "You're different, Frank. You need to talk to someone." But Frank couldn't talk. How do you explain to someone who's never been to war that you've killed more people than the population of most small towns? How do you explain that you're good at it? How do you explain that part of you misses it? Sarah left after a year. I can't compete with whatever's in your head, Frank. I'm sorry. His family tried to include him in Sunday dinners, Christmas gatherings, birthday parties. But Frank felt like he was watching life through bulletproof glass. He could see it, but he couldn't touch it. He started drinking. Not social drinking, but the kind of drinking that makes you forget. The kind that makes you sleep without dreams. The kind that makes you invisible. By 2010, Frank had lost his job, his apartment, his truck. He was living in his daddy's old fishing cabin outside town, drinking away his army pension and waiting to die. That's when he discovered that being invisible wasn't torture. It was freedom. Murphy's gas station, extended. When Frank started working at Murphy's gas station, he was 52 years old. He'd been drifting for 7 years, working odd jobs, staying invisible. He'd heard about the night shift opening from a customer at the diner where he washed dishes. Old Murphy's looking for someone to work nights, the trucker had said. Nobody wants to work alone out on Route 19. Too quiet, too dangerous. Frank applied the next day. Murphy himself was a Vietnam veteran, maybe 70 years old. He had that same look in his eyes that Frank recognized from the mirror. The look of someone who'd seen too much. You ever worked nights before? Murphy asked. Yeah, Frank replied. I'm good with quiet. Ever been in trouble with the law? No, sir. Ever been in the military? Frank hesitated. Yes, sir. Army. Murphy nodded. Combat? Yes, sir. You comfortable with being alone? Prefer. It? Murphy studied him for a long moment. Job's yours. But I got rules. No drinking on the job. No stealing. No asking questions about why I'm giving you a chance. Frank nodded. Understood. One more thing, Murphy said. Everybody deserves a second chance. Don't waste yours. For 6 years, Frank had become exactly what he wanted to be. Invisible. He worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, 5 days a week. He restocked shelves, cleaned bathrooms, rang up purchases for the few customers who appeared in the dead of night. Customers called him, "Hey, man," or "Excuse me," or simply snapped their fingers. College kids from Eastern Kentucky University would come in drunk, making jokes about the old loser working the night shift. Truckers treated him like automated equipment. Local teenagers would steal candy while he wasn't looking, then laugh about it outside. Frank never complained, never reported theft, never asked for raises or vacation time. He just showed up, did his job, and went home to his trailer. And Frank was content with this existence. Being invisible meant being safe. Being forgotten meant being left alone. Being nobody meant not disappointing anyone. That night extended tension, but this night was different. The black sedan was still parked at pump number 3. Engine running, windows closed. Nobody had gotten out to pump gas. The car had been sitting there for 17 minutes. Frank was watching from the security monitor behind the counter. The system was old, black and white, but it covered all the angles. Pump 3 was clearly visible from camera 2. Even after 22 years, his instincts were still sharp. Something was wrong with this picture. The car was too nice for this area. The windows were too dark. The positioning was too tactical. Easy exit to Route 19, but also good visibility of the store interior. Frank continued his routine, but his awareness level had shifted. In Iraq, they'd called it Condition Orange, relaxed but alert. Ready to move to Condition Red in a heartbeat. He casually walked to the coffee machine, eyes on the monitor. The sedan hadn't moved, still idling, still watching. At 2:47 a.m., the sedan doors opened. 3 men got out, all dressed in dark clothing, all moving with the same calculated precision. One took position by the front door. One moved to the side of the building. One approached the counter. Frank's mind automatically cataloged details. Male subjects, approximately 20 to 30 years old, average height and build, moving with purpose. Not panic. This wasn't a random robbery. This was planned. "Hey, old man," shouted the one approaching the counter. "Come outside." Frank slowly stood up from behind the register. 22 years had taken some speed from his movements, but none of the calculation. He was already running scenarios, evaluating options, identifying resources. "Stores closed, gentlemen," Frank said calmly. "You can only get gas. Stores closed?" The man laughed. It was a cold laugh, the kind Frank had heard from soldiers who'd been in combat too long. "We came for the store, didn't we, boys?" The other two men moved closer. Frank could see them clearly now through the window. One had a pistol tucked in his waistband. The other had what looked like a knife handle sticking out of his jacket pocket. Frank felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Fear was for people who didn't know how to handle violence. What Frank felt was alive, alert, purposeful, tactical assessment. Frank's mind switched to tactical mode automatically. 3 hostiles, probable weapons, limited exits, available resources. The store layout was burned into his memory. Counter. Position provided cover and concealment. Cash register could be used as a weapon. Coffee pot was hot, improvised weapon. Cigarette lighter fluid, accelerant. Under the register, his old M191 pistol sat in a locked box. Murphy had given him permission to keep it there, just in case. Frank had the key on his keychain. 3 seconds to access. 7 rounds in the magazine. 1 in the chamber. The hostiles were positioned tactically, but not perfectly. Subject. 1 was at the front door, closest threat, but also blocking escape route for his partners. Subject 2 was at the side window. Good overwatch, but limited mobility. Subject 3 was approaching the counter, primary threat, but isolated from backup. Frank had trained for situations like this. Room clearing, close quarters combat, multiple hostiles. The muscle memory was still there, even after 22 years. "Listen, old man," the leader continued, approaching the counter. "Open that register, give us the money, and nobody gets hurt." Frank nodded slowly. Okay, just stay calm." But Frank's voice carried a strange quality. Not fear, but something else. Something that made the leader pause for just a moment. "You military?" the leader asked. Frank met his eyes. "Used to be." The leader smiled. "Yeah? What branch? Army? Combat?" Frank nodded. "Some. Well, this ain't Iraq, old man. This is Kentucky. Open the register." Frank's hands moved to the register keys, but his mind was calculating distances, angles, timing. The leader was 8 feet away. Too close for Frank to reach the pistol without being seen, but close enough for hand-to-hand if necessary. The other 2 hostiles were repositioning, moving closer to the windows. They were getting overconfident, thinking they had control of the situation. They didn't understand that Frank Morrison had never lost control of anything in his life. Action sequence extended. Frank pressed the register keys slowly, deliberately. The old machine made its familiar grinding sound as the drawer opened. The leader stepped closer, eager to see the money. That's when Frank moved. 22 years of civilian life hadn't slowed his reflexes. His left hand continued opening the register while his right hand dropped below the counter, found the key, unlocked the box, and gripped the M1911, all in one fluid motion. The leader realized something was wrong, just as Frank's hand came up with the pistol. The man's eyes widened. His mouth opened to shout a warning. Frank's first shot took him center mass. The .45 caliber round hit with the authority of a freight train, spinning the leader backward into the chip display. The second hostile, positioned at the side window, started to draw his weapon. But Frank had already pivoted, his body memory from thousands of hours of training taking over. He shifted his stance, acquired the target, and squeezed the trigger. Bang. The second man dropped behind the ice cream freezer. The third hostile, at the front door, was raising his pistol when Frank's third shot shattered the window and found its mark. The man spun, hit the door, and collapsed. Total elapsed time 47 seconds. Frank stood behind the counter, pistol still aimed at the last position where he'd seen movement. His breathing was controlled, his hands steady. He swept the store with his eyes looking for additional threats. Nothing moved. Frank carefully approached each hostel, checking for weapons, checking for signs of life. All three were down. All three were no longer threats. He picked up their weapons, 2 pistols and a knife, and secured them behind the counter. Then he called 911. 911. What's your emergency? This is Murphy's gas station on Route 19. I just had an attempted robbery. 3 subjects down. I need police and ambulance. Are you injured, sir? No, ma'am. I'm fine. Are the subjects still on scene? Yes, ma'am. They're not going anywhere. Frank's voice was calm, professional, like he was reporting a routine maintenance issue instead of a triple shooting. Aftermath extended. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes. EMTs arrived 5 minutes after that. The store became a crime scene, flooded with flashing lights. And radio chatter. Frank sat calmly on a stool behind the counter, his hands folded in his lap. A pistol was on the counter, safely unloaded. He'd already given a preliminary statement to the first deputy on scene. Mr. Morrison, said Sheriff Hayes, a man Frank had seen in the store many times over the years. Can you walk me through? What happened? Frank recounted the events in chronological order, without emotion, without embellishment. Just facts, times, positions, actions taken. How many shots did you fire? Hayes asked. 3. All 3 subjects are down. That's some pretty good shooting. Frank shrugged. I was trained to hit what I aim at. Where were you trained? Army. When? 2003 to 2005? Iraq. Hayes made notes. What was your job in the Army? Infantry. Marksman. Frank didn't mention the 847 confirmed kills. Didn't mention the sniper training. Didn't mention that these 3 men had been moving targets at close range. Child's play compared to what he'd done in Mosul. The FBI arrived at dawn. Federal agents, because the incident involved potential interstate crime. They interviewed Frank for 3 hours, recorded his statement, and began their investigation. Mr. Morrison, said Special Agent Williams, this is going to be a high-profile case. You should probably get a lawyer. Frank looked at him. For what? 3 people are dead. There's going to be media attention. Questions about excessive force. I defended myself in my workplace from armed robbery, Frank said quietly. I didn't use excessive force. I used necessary force. Williams studied him. Are you sure you were just in the regular army? Frank met his eyes. I was a soldier. I did my job. Investigation and media extended. The FBI investigation took 2 weeks. They examined the security footage frame by frame. They analyzed the ballistics. They reconstructed the crime scene. They interviewed Frank multiple times. What they found was a textbook example of defensive shooting. 3 armed subjects. Clear threat of death or serious bodily harm. Reasonable response. Clean shoots, but they also found something else. When they ran Frank Morrison's name through military databases, they discovered his true service record. 2ND. Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, designated marksman. Special Operations Detachment, 847 confirmed kills. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Honorable Discharge. Mr. Morrison, Agent Williams said during their final interview, why didn't you tell us about your military specialty? Frank looked at him. You didn't ask. You were a sniper. I was a soldier. One of the best snipers in the Iraq War, according to your records. Frank shrugged. Records say a lot of things. Why are you working at a gas station? It's honest work. Williams closed his file. The shooting is justified. You won't be charged. But the media is going to find out about your background. Your life is about to change. Frank nodded. I understand. Any comment for the press? No. Media explosion. The story broke in the Louisville Courier-Journal 3 days later. War hero stops gas station robbery. By evening, it had been picked up by CNN, Fox News, and every major network. The narrative was irresistible. Quiet veteran, working the night shift, single-handedly stops 3 armed robbers. The David versus Goliath story that America loves. Reporters came to Murphy's gas station. TV trucks parked in the lot. Cameras pointed at the bullet holes in the windows. Everyone wanted to interview Frank Morrison. Frank refused all interviews. When reporters approached him, he would simply say, "No comment," and walk away. The media. Attention brought crowds. People drove from hundreds of miles away to see the gas station where the hero veteran had his shootout. Business quadrupled overnight. Murphy himself became a minor celebrity. Frank's a good man, he told the reporters. Always been reliable. Always been honest. I ain't surprised he stood up when he had to. But Frank hated the attention. He'd always been invisible, and now he was the most visible man in Kentucky. His picture was on the front page of newspapers. His name was on the evening news. His story was being told by strangers. Community reaction. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. Veterans from 3 states came to Murphy's gas station just to shake Frank's hand. Purple Heart recipients, Bronze Star recipients, Silver Star recipients. Men and women who understood what Frank had been through. Thank you for your service, they would say. Frank would nod politely, but he was uncomfortable with the praise. He'd never asked for recognition. He'd never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted to be left alone. Local teenagers who had mocked him for years now treated him with respect. College students who had ignored him now asked for his autograph. Truckers who had been rude now spoke to him like an old friend. The change was dramatic and immediate. Frank Morrison was no longer invisible. Personal transformation. But the attention had an unexpected effect on Frank. For the first time in 22 years, he felt useful. People were looking at him with respect instead of pity. They were seeing him as a protector instead of a victim. A young veteran from Afghanistan came into the store one night. Frank recognized the look in his eyes, the same lost, haunted expression Frank had seen in his own mirror for years. "You're Frank Morrison," the young man said. "I am. I heard about what you did. I'm having a hard time adjusting to being back." Frank looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in years, Frank saw someone who needed help. Someone he could help. "It's hard," Frank said. "But it gets easier. How do you deal with it?" Frank thought about the question. How did he deal with it? The nightmares, the guilt, the feeling of being disconnected from the world? "One day at a time," he said. "One night at a time. You find something to do that matters. You find a way to be useful." The young veteran nodded. Can I come back and talk to you again?" "Sure," Frank said. "I'm here every night." Final transformation. Over the following months, more veterans started coming to Murphy's gas station. Not for gas, but to talk to Frank. Word spread through the veteran community that there was a man who understood, who had been there, who wouldn't. Judge Frank found himself becoming an unofficial counselor. He didn't have training in psychology, but he had something more valuable, credibility. When Frank Morrison told a struggling veteran that life was worth living, they believed him. The nightmares didn't stop. The guilt didn't disappear. But for the first time since Iraq, Frank felt like he was serving a purpose. He was helping people who needed help. He was using his experience to make other people's lives better. And slowly, gradually, Frank Morrison began to heal. Epilogue extended. 6 months after the shooting, Frank still worked the night shift at Murphy's gas station. He still stocked shelves, cleaned bathrooms, and rang up purchases. But he was no longer invisible. The bullet holes in the windows had been repaired, but Murphy left a small plaque on the counter in recognition of Frank Morrison, who protected this store and community on March 15th, 2024. Frank tried to get Murphy to remove it, but the old man refused. "Some things need to be remembered," Murphy said. "The FBI had offered Frank a job as a trainer. The state police had offered him a position as a tactical instructor. Several private security companies had made generous offers. Frank turned them all down. He was content working at Murphy's gas station. He was content being useful in his own quiet way. Late at night, when the store was empty and Route 19 was quiet, Frank would think about the path that had brought him here. The war, the guilt, the years of invisibility, and finally, the moment when he'd been forced to become visible again. He thought about the 3 men who had died in his store. They'd made their choice. They'd accepted the consequences. Frank felt no guilt about their deaths. They'd been predators, and he'd been a protector. He thought about the little girl in Mosul, the one who'd run into his line of fire. She was probably 16 now, somewhere in Iraq, maybe going to school, maybe getting married. Frank hoped she was happy. He hoped she'd forgotten about the American bullet that had scarred her shoulder. He thought about the veterans who came to see him, looking for answers, looking for hope. Frank couldn't give them easy answers, but he could give them something more valuable, the knowledge that they weren't alone. Closing scene at 5:59 a.m. Frank began his end-of-shift routine. Count the till, lock the register, turn off the pumps, walk the perimeter, check the locks, turn off the lights. At exactly 6 a.m., Frank clocked out and walked to his truck. The sun was coming up over the hills of Kentucky, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Frank Morrison, the invisible man, drove home to his trailer on Elm Street. In a few hours, he would sleep. Tonight, he would return to Murphy's gas station and work another shift, because he was a gas station attendant, and he was a protector, and he was a man who had found his purpose. The security camera footage still sits in FBI archives. 47 seconds that changed everything. 3 men who chose violence. 1 man who chose to stand up. Frank Morrison never gave interviews, never wrote a book, never became a celebrity. He just went to work every night and did his job, and that was enough.